Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh spoke to the media at the 2024 Scouting Combine, and they had a lot to say. We talk about general takeaways from their comments. Also, if they revealed some futures of players like Justin Madubuike and Odell Beckham Jr. All that and more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you so much for being here on Locked On Ravens and making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel and show your support there, or in audio form. If you're an audio listener, you can follow along, subscribe, follow anywhere you get your podcasts on your favorite podcasting platforms. We're 5 days a week on Locked On Ravens, bringing Ravens news, analysis, and updates. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with unlimited $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We're back. It is a midweek edition of the show on Wednesday. Coming after two press conferences from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh at the Scouting Combine. And here to dive into general takeaways and if some futures were revealed on some players, here is Jake Louque of Exit 52, the jumbo set. Jake, I know you always get a kick out of my little intro behind the scenes because my mic gets super loud, and so I have to say words before I do the actual intro. So I say like Ravens, 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 and then I do it. I know you get a kick out of that.
You know that's what I was giggling at in the room there. It tickles me every time. I'm gonna text you a clip after this of the Dan Patrick show. They do the Jim Nantz sound alike contest, and like 5 years ago, this guy did it. Like he pretended to be Jim Nantz, but he was like Ron Burgundy, like warming up for the Masters, like 45 seconds before they're about to go on air. You know, yeah. Clint Eastwood climbs the dogwood, like unique New York. Like I gotta get that to you because it's the Ron Burgundy routine. It just kills me.
Yeah, it's like, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, repeat that 3 times and then go, like, boom, you're in. So, yes, that part gets edited out, but obviously Jake gets.
You got to do some behind-the-scenes content to do a little
bonus.
Special.
Yeah, bonus episode. I might have to. I might do that as like a 5-year special. Do like biggest bloopers or outtakes. That'd be something I should probably do here.
Yeah.
But with the Ravens, Jake, I know, again, very disappointing how the championship game ended. We talked before the playoffs started. Obviously, we had sky-high expectations, sky-high excitement, and all that came crashing down in the championship game. And we've moved on from that. At least I've tried to. And now we're trying to move in to this offseason, which is another big one. I think last offseason was huge because of Lamar. And you could argue this one might even be bigger because of now the team that they have to build around him with limited salary cap space, although the increase in the cap certainly helped. But John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta talked to the media at the Scouting Combine. And I first wanted to just get your general takeaways before we dive into specifics on what they said. Were you satisfied with their answers based off of what you heard and what they said?
Yeah, I like the idea that there seems to be a theme of adaptability whenever they do these sort of press conferences. On our podcast today, the Jumbo Set, which you can check out wherever you get your shows on YouTube, I played a clip of Eric sort of talking about nothing really even germane to football, just like what he reads and like his podcasts and stuff that he's interested in. And, he's getting into like these investment books and he's interested in finance and like war history and that kind of stuff. He just seems like an overall very strategic kind of guy. Seems very malleable, seems willing to adjust on the fly a little bit more than I think Ozzie Newsome was in the past. We all love Ozzie, obviously, but it seems like he kind of had a set way of doing things and he didn't deviate from it very often. And I think that bit him a little bit at the end of his career there in the mid 2010s. And I think DeCosta's ability to take big swings, move on from big swings when they don't work out, and continue to take big swings. He's had a marquee signing almost every year, or a marquee trade almost every year that he's been on the job. He's swung at wide receiver in the draft in a way that Ozzie never would. I mean, he's taken first and second round wide receivers pretty much every year, it feels like. So, it feels like he's kind of modernized the operation. It's sleek. And to your point, people were emotional and hot and angry after that AFC Championship loss. I certainly was among them, but Combine week and these opening press conferences are always kind of a nice turning over, cleaning of the slate type thing. And it's always nice to hear from DeCosta. You could critique his moves here and there, but I think he's a genuine guy, a smart guy. And, my takeaway is just overall is that I think the Ravens are in good hands, going to remain that way.
Yeah, I don't think he hides anything, and I know. I think one of
Well, yeah, so
well, to the extent of like he's not going to reveal everything on
right.
there, but I think what I'm talking about is more so like if you remember, when was it, like 2 years ago, the Senior Bowl videos where he was putting out a video each day.
I just put one of those out actually the other day. I was kind of
Did you? I didn't see it.
I was listening to Pearl Jam, drinking a Coca-Cola, and I hadn't had Dunkin', but it's when he was like saying like Dunkin' Donuts,
Yeah.
check. Pearl Jam, check. I was like, I had the EDC day here.
Those are the things you get the inside scoop from DeCosta on those things. And I think, again, someone that is very detailed in his answers, and I think it goes a long way, especially with the fan base. And he talked about the cap a little bit, and this is kind of like what I'm talking about, where he said, look, it was nice that it happened. It certainly helps out. But he says it's a buffer, but it's not in a way where we're going to go out there and just open up the books. It's not, they're not going to go out there and hand out $50 million contracts and say, well, let's see what that does in 3 years. He said that they're excited about the potential to be a good team, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to abandon what he called, quote unquote, the Ravens way, which I think if I'm defining that, it's they don't necessarily jump head first into free agency. They sit back, they let the market play out a little bit, maybe for a day or a week. And then they come back and maybe scoop up some of these guys where their markets didn't develop or their contract asking price is not what they're getting. I don't expect the Ravens to go out there, Jake, and make all these splashy moves, especially with their cap situation. And I think DeCosta's comments said as such.
Yeah, I think with what you're working with, basically, I think the big move that you really expect or could expect and are hoping for is just Justin Madubuike is going to have to be that guy for you this year. Can you get that deal done before the deadline to place the franchise tag? And it sounds like they're going to do that regardless. I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, they're going to be tied up against it a little bit here. You're in a post-Lamar Jackson contract world. You doled out a lot of money to a couple guys over the last couple of years. And, maybe the Piper is going to start to come due on that. But they always seem to find creative ways. Like how much cap space did they have a couple of years ago, right? And again, it's a calculated thing where, and this is what I'm referencing, like it's a calculated thing where like Tyrann Mathieu is on the market and everyone's like, oh man, big name, free safety. But they go and they take a lot of money and they pay Marcus Williams. I don't think a lot of people were really expecting that. And he was a top name on the market, but he didn't necessarily carry that same star power as a Tyrann Mathieu. So, maybe they find a way to free up some space, restructures here and there. I don't necessarily hope they go that route in the case of some players, but you can always move money around. You can always find a way to supplement this roster, if not bring a starting caliber player in or a Pro Bowl caliber player like they have done, like I said, a lot more than they used to under Ozzie.
Yeah, I host Locked On NFL on Mondays on the network, and I talked with Ross Jackson, who's the host of Locked On Saints, who the Saints have been like $100 million over the cap for what, like 5 straight years now. Like it just feels like every year they're either 80 million, 90 million, 100 over the cap, and there's just this cap dance they do with restructures and freeing up money, where they go and they bring in Derek Carr when they were like 60 million over the cap. Like it's ridiculous.
And like, isn't it funny that the fulcrum of that thing was not the fact that they act like the cap isn't real? It was more just the fact that they had Drew Brees. Like, this is like with this whole like cap isn't real, move money around this and that. The Saints, the Saints do it. They had Brees and it worked then, but now they're just kind of middling around 500 every year. And then obviously the Rams have been doing it, but they needed Matthew Stafford to push them over the edge. So like that whole cap isn't real. You can spend, over and, spend on that credit card is fine, but you got to have the quarterback to do it. And I mean, bring it back to the Ravens, I think they certainly do. So if they want to get a little more aggressive this offseason, it would be interesting to see how they do it with where they are at cap wise, but it also wouldn't totally shock me.
No, it wouldn't. And with the Saints, they've obviously done a big thing with void years. I think people understood what void years were, but a lot of people also didn't. Then when that Taysom Hill contract first came out, everyone's like, they just paid him this boatload of money when in reality it was all these void years taxed on. And the Ravens have actually started to employ that. And you would think, oh, the Ravens would never do something like that. They hadn't done it for a really long time. I don't think they ever used void years, if I'm not mistaken, before this offseason, maybe a couple times in the past. But then you have Lamar deal with void years. Odell's deal obviously was the big one where they attached those void years on the end of that one. Do you expect the Ravens to try to use that again to maybe push money towards the future, but understanding that, hey, this is the window right here. You have to be competitive now, and they'll get maybe any advantage they can, even if it means having that money in the future that might cause some complications?
Yeah, it wouldn't totally shock me because, like you said, you can kick that can down the road. And like I said, if you have the quarterback, like, why not do it? Like, you're in Lamar Jackson's absolute prime. He's going to be 28 years old. I mean, it feels like he's been in the league forever, but 28, I mean, that's right in your prime for a quarterback. He's probably got another couple of years at least of being in his prime. So I don't hate the idea of continuing to just kind of kick the can and say, hey, let's just keep trying to build around this guy. And they had some interesting comments about how they're going to continue to build the offense around him. They talked about, to your tweet there that I referenced earlier, rebuilding the offensive line, which is, that's certainly different phraseology than revamping or retooling. Like that, a rebuild that indicates something a little bit bigger, like you said on Twitter there. So, I certainly could see it happen.
And that is a perfect transition into our first break. So we'll take a break, and coming back in the second part of the show, we'll talk about what John Harbaugh had to say. We'll talk about Jake's comment there about how Harbaugh and the Ravens' vision is to build the offense or continue to build it around Lamar Jackson. So be sure to stay tuned with stuff. A lot to get to here on this episode of Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets. Then a winning $5 bet, it's $150 if your bet wins. Obviously, no football because the Super Bowl is over, but NBA is in full swing and MLB is coming right after that. You can bet all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy, so Nikola Jokic. If you want to bet on the Nuggets, Nikola Jokic, I think it's a pretty safe bet. They're good. Nikola Jokic is obviously the best player in the NBA. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? Would you read a book? Show up for a friend? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? And if time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze the special thing in your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do it more. Therapy has so many different benefits, whether it's learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, and empower you to come to the solution yourself, and isn't just for those who experience major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suit your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens with Jake Louque of Exit 52. I am Kevin Ostreicher. And Jake, I do want to read out that John Harbaugh quote because I think the Ravens put it out and I was like, oh, hey, this is a summary of what John Harbaugh said. And it got a lot of negative comments, like a lot of
fire John Harbaugh.
That exact. I don't think he could go 3 comments without seeing something about firing John Harbaugh on that thread. And so this is essentially what he said. He said they came out the first day after the AFC Championship game. They talked about where they want to go offensively. They had a staff meeting, met with Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson, coaches individually, met with different players. But the paragraph that got people was, I'll just read it out word for word. He said, quote, "We want to do right by our players. We want to do right by Lamar and build the best operation that we can for him so his talent can really shine. And I think we're just starting with that." And so I think a lot of people took that as, okay, well, this is year 7 for Lamar, which first of all is absolutely unreal. 2 things are crazy to me. 1 is Lamar Jackson's 7th year, and 2, Roquan Smith is only 26 years old. Those 2 things I will not ever believe because they're not real to me. But I don't know if Harbaugh is referencing, and he said at the beginning of the quote, yeah, okay, we're 1 year into this thing, which obviously alludes to the Todd Monken offense and that transition. So, I mean, what'd you make of that whole quote and spiel, I guess, from John Harbaugh? Because I think a lot of different people took it a lot of different ways.
Of all the things to get mad at, I certainly have my, quarrels and qualms with the way things ended to some extent, but I don't know, what more do you want to see from this offense this year other than, being a little bit more competitive and a little more ready to go in that AFC Championship? And obviously that's a big caveat and a big factor. You want to be playing your best in those moments, but I mean, man, they were 7 points away there from going to overtime in an AFC Championship game. And, if Zay Flowers doesn't fumble through the end zone or have a taunting penalty, if Kyle Van Noy doesn't have a penalty that he had, and, they just get themselves behind the 8 ball, that game could have been a lot more competitive, and we could have walked out of it narratively feeling a little bit different, feeling a little bit more encouraged, even if they had lost. So I don't know. These are just kind of and, you hear the phrase liar's luncheon thrown around, and, we even joked earlier in the show about how, Eric DeCosta is kind of playing his cards close to the vest some of the time. And, you want them to do that, but it's also yeah, of course they want to keep building around him. And honestly, I hate the way that the season ending the way that it did has kind of soured people's opinions on this offense a little bit, because I think they took some really, really big strides this past year. I mean, they were down Mark Andrews for over half a season, and they're still getting it done there with Likely, who they picked in the 4th round, who is looking like one of the better tight ends in the league right now. He's your second option. Hopefully Mark Andrews comes back fully healthy. I don't see why he wouldn't. You got Aguilar back in the fold. You've got Zay Flowers to build around. You got Bateman around for another couple of years. If you exercise that 5th year option, we'll see what happens there. But, they're a couple pieces away from being ready to go in the passing game again. maybe make some additions at running back. I know there's been a lot of buzz around that. I'm not totally sure how I feel about some of it. Maybe we'll get into that too, but rebuild that offensive line, like they said, and find yourself some supplemental pieces, and you're right back there, man. They were one of the best offenses in the league this year by pretty much all metrics. So, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here of that AFC Championship game loss is overall what I'd take away from it. And I think John is approaching it that way, and I think his comments reflect as such.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say about it just in general, if you're talking about how they've built their offense over or around Lamar over the last 6 seasons. They should have done more when he was on his rookie contract. I think that they should have tried to be more aggressive. I think a lot of people would agree with that statement. But I think that with Todd Monken coming in, they did take steps, right? I think it did take a little too long for them to fully embrace, all right, we're going to go all in on Lamar in the offense and give him weapons. But drafting Zay Flowers, and it's not like they hadn't tried to invest. Obviously, they've taken 3 wide receivers over the first 5 years of Eric DeCosta's tenure, starting in 2019 with Marquise Brown, 2021 with Rashod Bateman, and then 2023 with Zay Flowers. But I do think that they took steps by adding Flowers. They bring in Odell, which Lamar had said, hey, I really want to play with either Odell Beckham Jr. or DeAndre Hopkins. And the Ravens went out there and they got him Odell. Now we're going to see what they do in terms of continuing to build around him. But as you mentioned, Jake, part of that is on the offensive line, which we'll get to in the final part of the show, and also maybe a running back or two there. We'll also get to that. But I think the people really wanted to know. I think if any player was to be talked about, it was Justin Madubuike, who we did mention at the beginning of the show here. And Eric DeCosta did reveal that they are trying to get a deal done with Justin Madubuike, as they should be. He had 13 sacks last year and was a staple on that defensive line. But then he also revealed that, look, if a deal can't get done, the franchise tag is probably going on there. So all but confirms, without actually saying it, that Justin Madubuike is going to stay in Baltimore one way or the other. Now, it's advantageous for the Ravens and Madubuike if the franchise tag is not the end result by the time the season starts. The Ravens, if they do tag him for that $22.1 million number, that would be on their cap as a 1-year fully guaranteed deal until an extension is reached. And obviously, if you're a player, that franchise tag doesn't give you a lot of long-term stability. So do you feel like an extension is going to be able to be reached by this deadline coming up here in, I think, about a week now? Or do you think it might take into the spring or summer to get something fully done?
Yeah, it might take a little while, but I do expect it will get done before the season because, like you said, it's just that $22 million charge is a whole lot. And I mean, if the semantics are like, $3, $4, $5 million, better than the next best guy that's going to be getting paid, like it just doesn't seem like a guy who's getting 10 sacks and he has 10 straight sacks in a game. Like that's production that's tough to replace, and he makes impacts outside of just his sacks as well. And that's something the Ravens talked about with Odafe Owe. They look at more than just sack production. They're looking at the full picture, and he brings a lot to the full picture. So I don't know. I just think that he's one of those guys where, and they're probably going to lose Patrick Queen this season or this offseason in just a couple weeks here. So it'll be a tough pill to swallow to lose both of these guys within an offseason of one another, or even if they tagged him and he were to walk. I mean, a 3rd-round comp pick for what he brought to you, that's just not good enough. I think they've got to find a way to get this thing done with him.
Yeah, interior pass rush is so hard to find, and I'll credit Mr. Spencer Schultz, who you are very familiar with, for Mr. Baby Aaron Donald. I know that he got a lot of. When did he put that out? Was that like 3 years ago? He said that.
Yeah, it was a while ago at this point. He was early on that, and I think he kind of soft launched that take on the podcast because like you can kind of do that. You can slip those comments in there, and people kind of miss them. But once you put it on Twitter, that's when it's really out there for people to glom onto, and they certainly did. I think people were happy to kind of poke fun at him there for a little bit, but my guy Spenny, man, he's got a keen eye for this stuff, and I think nobody is Aaron Donald, but Justin Madubuike pretty darn close to as good of a facsimile as you can get. So yeah, 2 trained together, so obviously he's learning from Aaron Donald. But you think they're doing the knives, like they're like doing the cutting through the air, exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting because I think we're talking about premium positions. I think along the defensive line, it's turning into one, but just the pass rush in general, it's hard. I mean, the Ravens haven't had an interior pass rusher like this since, probably Haloti Ngata, then going back Trevor Price. So is there anybody else that you can think of? And I mean, yeah, and those are the 2 guys. I mean, and obviously there are probably other examples, but what I would say is just like, think about how much of a pain it is to play against those guys within the division. I think back to Geno Atkins when he was on the Bengals. Oh, yeah. Think about Hargrave and some of these guys on the Steelers, Hayward. Like it's that type of thing that, it not only is it great to have on your team, but you just know that it is a game wrecker for opposing teams when you get an interior pressure like that. So, yeah.
He's going to be worth every single penny. And again, with DeCosta's comments, certainly seems like he is not going to be going anywhere. Just a matter of whether it will be on the 1-year franchise tag or the extension. But DeCosta and John Harbaugh actually both talked about Odell Beckham Jr. Now, there are a lot of questions about whether Beckham will come back to Baltimore. Obviously signed that 1 year, $18 million deal, which ended up being up to 15 guaranteed, which again was based off of his just pure box score stats, a pretty steep price to pay. I don't think he necessarily contributed $15 million worth of statistics, but we saw the veteran leadership. We saw him embrace the Ravens culture and just Baltimore in general. John Harbaugh said that his fingers are crossed for the potential return and said, you never know. Those are the things that answer themselves in time. Eric DeCosta also talked about it a little bit as well. And talking about how he's been texting with Odell, has become a great friend of his. Now, my opinion on the receiver room, Jake, I'll give it here quickly. I'm of the mindset that 6 wide receivers is the perfect number. And right now you have 4 of them. Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, and Tylan Wallace. Now, with those other 2 spots, I would say 1 goes to a veteran and 1 goes to a draft pick. That's what my early prediction would be. Now, is that veteran bringing back Odell, or would maybe you want to go and see who's out there on the free agent market? I don't necessarily know of how realistic Mike Evans is, probably not very realistic, or a guy like Michael Pittman Jr. I don't think they'll necessarily swing for those fences. But do you go out there and bring in somebody who maybe can give you a little more than Odell can at this point in his career? Essentially, what could happen here, or what maybe did, is they had 1 spot for Aguilar and Beckham, and they chose Aguilar. I don't know if you feel that same way, but it might have been what happened. I don't know.
I think it probably is. And, Aguilar's a little bit younger. He's not as banged up. I think he was overall, like, Beckham made more impact plays, but I think Aguilar was kind of more that consistent option, right? Work in the middle of the field a little bit. He made some nice splash plays too. He had the long touchdown against the Bengals, a couple other touchdowns throughout the course of the year. Just a good, solid chain mover. And yeah, I love the impact plays that Beckham brought. I love the attitude that he brought. It is interesting, though, because it kind of felt like if you look at those snap counts and what they were doing with him at the end of the year, it felt like he got phased out in favor of Bateman a little bit in some senses, which was interesting. I mean, he was kind of brought in to be that closer in those big game situations. And it just, I don't know, maybe he wasn't separating enough. He did have a couple injuries at the beginning of the year. Maybe that slowed him down. But overall, yeah, I loved what he brought. I just feel like it kind of petered out a little bit at the end there. And maybe that'll reflect in what they choose to do here. And maybe they've already made that choice with Aguilar, to your point.
Yeah, they were very vocal before the year, and Beckham was, Harbaugh was, about, we have a plan. They talked about it with Odell, and Odell, they kind of came to this agreement of, hey, we're gonna do this during the offseason, kind of phase it in a little bit. Then he suffered an injury early on. He had to miss some time, and I think maybe that kind of threw a wrench in some things, maybe just in terms of getting him back on the field or just dealing with a nag. It was the shoulder thing, I think, where he got banged up a couple times with it.
And he's had a lot of soft tissue stuff over the years too.
Yeah.
I mean, that really adds up. I've dealt with it myself. So
right. Coupled with, the knee tears and everything that he's gone through, I think he can still be a contributor, and I don't think he'll cost that much money. I know he's projected right now, I think, a 1 year, $12 million deal, which I still think is a little steep at this point, but maybe he goes to like a Kansas City if there's a bargain deal there. He goes to a Buffalo where they're in wide receiver purgatory right now outside of Stephon Diggs, and I don't even know how long that's going to last.
Say that, that might be wide receiver hell that they're in with him.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, because for so long we were talking about how Baltimore was just in this terrible spot with receivers. Now you look at their room and you're like, all right, Zay Flowers, everything works out for him, is looking like an NFL wide receiver 1. Bateman's shown the potential. Obviously, the connection hasn't been there as much as everybody would like with him and Lamar, but you have 2 young pieces, and maybe you can add in a couple of other solid players here. So it's going to be interesting how it all works out. And coming up in the final part of the show, we will transition into talking about Rashod Bateman and also what the running back room and offensive line room could look like in 2024 based off what John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta had to say. We got a lot coming your way on Locked On Ravens. Don't go anywhere. First, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps you ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 120 million parts, your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, your money back. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at eBay Motors. That was what I told Exclusions supply eBay Guaranteed Fit all available to his customers. Locked On Ravens here. We're back, our final part of this midweek edition. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Jake Louque. Thank you for tuning in today. Making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow, log in audio form, the whole 9 yards with that. Jake, Rashod Bateman's been a very popular topic of conversation, especially after the season ended. I think we saw a really nice cut up from Jonas Schaefer, the Baltimore Banner, of him winning his routes and winning them hard. And we knew coming out of Minnesota, he was a route runner and a really good one at that. And John Harbaugh talked about Bateman and said that he thinks he's going to take a big step. He's going to get a lot of opportunities this year, and kind of talked about how as he got healthier, you could see it in the play from him. And John Harbaugh is giving a lot of confidence that Bateman's going to be a high impact player for them. But this is year 4 for Rashod. He's dealt with a lot of injuries over the course of his first 3 years. That's certainly thrown a wrench in the connection he and Lamar have had. But what are your expectations for Bateman this year?
I don't know. I think he's just going to have to step up. And I think that starts with, you just got to be there in August. Like, I don't know what he's got to do, like put himself in the cryo chamber there, Dragon Ball Z style over the course of the offseason, and just be ready to rock for that practice and training camp, because I think that's when that trust is built. And hopefully it's not really irreparably damaged here with him and Lamar, because like you said, man, he was getting open. He got open on that play that, where Lamar gets strip sacked in the AFC Championship game. Imagine if he scores there. Maybe once again, maybe the narrative changes, even if they don't win, who knows? So yeah, like you just got to be there in August. You got to be ready to go in that early part of the season and build some confidence, because not only are you playing for hopefully getting this team to a Super Bowl at long last, but you're playing for your own career here. I mean, you're coming up on that 5th year option. Like I said, it's going to be expensive to pick up. So he's going to have to put a lot of good stuff on tape here to inspire confidence in the Ravens that they're going to do that, and maybe even eventually pay him down the line. And just got to find a way to get over those injuries. And I love Rashod on a personal level. I've gotten the chance to interview him. I thought he was a very insightful young guy. He's been through a lot in his life, overcome a lot of adversity off the field. So, he seems to have also moved past some of the stuff with the attitude that I didn't love, calling out DeCosta on Twitter or whatever. Was that this time last year? I mean,
I think it was last year. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I didn't necessarily love that when that happened from him, but I think he and Eric talked about it and he grew from it. And I think he had a good attitude all year, despite the fact that he wasn't necessarily getting that production. I remember he scored that touchdown against the Bengals, and all his teammates really hyped for him, which was great to see. And it seems like maybe he's learned a lot from Beckham too, who's, been through a lot of stuff in his career in a lot of different ways. So.
Yeah, there's that picture of Rashod and Odell when Bateman was in Minnesota, and I think that made the rounds back when Odell signed with the Ravens. But would you pick up the option, Jake? It's $14.3 million. You're maybe in a Patrick Queen situation where you've seen the potential, but it hasn't fully translated. And if you decline it, obviously, if Bateman balls out, much like Patrick Queen did, he hits free agency as one of the more attractive free agents next year.
I want to see at least the baseline of what he put out this past year. And certainly I'd hope to see a little bit more, but at least the baseline. I mean, the way these wide receiver contracts are working these days, that's probably not that expensive, I don't think. So I'd probably lean toward yes if he puts enough good stuff on tape, shows some consistency, and stays healthy. But I mean, on the flip side of that, wide receivers are coming to the draft like at a crazy rate every single year. I mean, it's like the housing market in 2006. Just flying off. Just options everywhere. Just free financing. Just sign on the dotted line. Like they're just everywhere. And maybe the bubble is bursting on that a little bit, and the draft is kind of that sort of shortcut that you can take to rebuild your room pretty easily, because these guys are coming in, they're pro ready, and they're good to go. And I think without some of these issues that Rashod has dealt with injury wise, I think he probably could have been one of those guys. So, go out there, like I said, improve upon last year. Most importantly, stay healthy, eliminate some of those concentration drops, get on the same page with Lamar, and then I'd say yes.
Yeah, he's a talented young player, and I think we've seen the reps, just not the connection between both Lamar and Rashod. So hopefully it works out for him, but sticking with the offensive side of the ball, Jake, Eric DeCosta did talk about the running back position, which is in a bit of a peculiar spot this offseason, considering almost every single running back on the roster from last year is either a free agent or injured. You have 3 free agents in Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Dalvin Cook, and that Dalvin Cook signing is still really weird to me based off of the usage.
Dalvin. Yeah. I mean,
incredible. Hyped him up and just never really used them.
Honestly, I think we're gonna have to blame this on you. I think you put some bad juju out there with that.
With my tweet.
Yeah, with that engagement farming tweet. I think we're gonna have to.
For those that don't know what Jake's talking about, my favorite thing ever to do on Twitter now is I picked up. It's a little bit of a hobby now. I picked it up when who was the first one? I did it with Melvin Gordon. The first one was Deshaun Jackson. I did it with Deshaun Jackson. The only thing I said with Deshaun Jackson when he signed with Baltimore last year was, "Oh, look, this is Ravens wide receiver. It's the newest wide receiver, Ravens wide receiver, Deshaun Jackson." And it was a compilation of his top 10 longest receptions. and they had the years, they plastered across the screen on each one. The first one was from 2009. Like literally at this point, almost
like it might as well have had the Miracle in the Meadowlands in there. Like that far back. Like,
almost 20 years ago at this point, 15 now in 2024. And all the comments were, this was like 4 presidencies ago. Like this is like these Obama administration
whenever you're
highlights.
talking about the presidency, that's when you're dipping deep into the well.
Yeah. So I did it with Deshaun. And it's my favorite thing is the comments crack me up. So I did it with Melvin Gordon, then I did it here with Dalvin Cook. But I did his Florida State highlights, the college highlights. And so I said, oh, the Ravens are getting a dog in Dalvin Cook, back when he was
like a swing pass from Jameis. Like,
back when he was like 20 years old and just coming out of college, and everyone's like, you're really hyping up Dalvin Cook in 2024 with Florida State highlights. So you know what, Jake, I will take some of the blame. I will take.
Let's just think about that next time they sign a guy like this. Let's think before we press that.
And you know what? I did it with Julio and the Eagles too, just to see how it would go in like just general NFL. Right. The Julio thing did not work out for Philadelphia, for Philadelphia whatsoever. So
I don't think anything worked out for them. I mean,
no. Maybe I'm the jinx. We'll see. I'll have to do an experiment with one of them and not do it, and then do it for another one.
Just clear it with me next time.
Okay. All right. Yes. You're the man above. I'll do that with you next time. But with the running back position, again, Cook, Edwards, Dobbins, all free agents. Keaton Mitchell towards ACL pretty late in the season, so it's unclear whether he'll be back. It's going to be interesting to see what they do because the draft is not great running back wise. You're not going to see a first-round running back, maybe not even a second-round running back. But this free agent class is just littered with talent. You got Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs and Austin Eckler and Tony Pollard, and the list goes on and on and on there. And there's been a lot of smoke around Derrick Henry to Baltimore, a lot of smoke around Baltimore just being in play for a running back. I saw this clip like 4 times before I put it out on Twitter, the Jeremy Fowler clip. I think, were you the first one to put that out? Was that you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I had seen it from like 4 different accounts, and I put it out as well. But it's the one of him, Jeremy Fowler, saying, well, I talked to someone in the Ravens organization, and they said, oh, can you imagine Lamar and Saquon in the same backfield and what that would do for the running game? Do you think the Ravens should spend big money relative to the running back position on a guy like Derrick Henry or Saquon or Josh Jacobs this year? And do you think that would make a big enough difference for the Ravens offense next year?
I'd say I wouldn't spend big money. I mean, you could probably, you look at all these guys, that's a lot of names you just listed. Not all those guys are going to get signed in that first wave. So if you want to go and make another big move elsewhere and then come back on that second or third wave and say, hey, Josh Jacobs is still there. There was trade rumors kind of swirling there. It sounded like he actually wanted to come here. He has some ties to the area. They had a trade in place for Derrick Henry. This was reported by our guy, Cole Jackson, that a deal was in place to trade for Derrick Henry, and it was nixed by the owner. This was just, again, confirmed a couple days ago by Ari Myrov. So, that's, public knowledge at this point. So it wouldn't shock me if they were to make a big move. But like I said, I just hope, from my perspective, they don't do it in that first wave and kind of overextend themselves. Because, with all those names you mentioned, there's going to be a quality guy there within that second or third week when you can get somebody, I wouldn't say off the scrap heap, but off of that kind of that discount aisle a little bit.
And kind of a follow-up to just the position in general. It feels like the Ravens, and look, DeCosta talked about this during his combine interview. He said, look, we need more than 2 running backs. Is essentially what he said. So he literally said, I think you'll see us make a couple acquisitions along the way. Obviously, Keaton's going to come back from the injury at some point, whether that's before the season or not. But do you see Gus Edwards coming back? Do you see J.K. Dobbins coming back? Or do you think they're not going to bring back any of their free agents and they're just going to go maybe with a veteran and then maybe a mid-round draft pick or something?
Yeah, I don't know if Dobbins even wants to come back. I think he's probably just going to be looking for a fresh start if I had to kind of get my read of that situation there. Gus, I don't know. I think it's about time. I think they're ready to part ways a little bit. He's still an effective kind of short yardage guy, great on the goal line. Obviously had, a ton of touchdowns this year to many people's chagrin within the Ravens fan base, actually, funny enough. But yeah, I don't know. You could probably just find that elsewhere. As much as I love Gus and he's been a fan favorite, sometimes it's just time and I'm good with moving on. I think Dobbins, it sucks to lose him, but you talk about wear and tear. That guy has been dealing with it his entire career here. And then obviously most catastrophically the last couple of years with that Achilles. So yeah, I do hope that, they rebuild this room in some form or fashion. We talk about rebuilding the O-line. They're going to need to do it here. Keaton Mitchell, I'm not a doctor, but I wouldn't expect him back until mid-season at the earliest. So, you got him. You've got Justice Hill still in the mix. So I think he's a very solid, serviceable player. But you're really going to need to get some talent in there. I think the lack of running back talent, as much as everyone wants to talk about it being this replaceable position. And I tend to agree. But I do think at a certain point, it can prove to be a differentiating factor a little bit. And I think it showed through in that last game to a certain extent. So I would love to get a guy in there with some versatility who can catch the ball, maybe a guy who can pass protect. Just get, they just need some more horses, really, is what it comes down to. So, yeah, I do hope to see some moves made. But like I said, I'd probably opt out of that first wave kind of big ticket. And I'm not, the way the league is going, I'm not really sure there's going to be a ton of big ticket first day sign Derrick Henry things happening anyway. So I think the guys will be available.
Yeah, and we saw it last year, too, where guys just weren't getting deals. And then you had a bunch of guys on the franchise tag, and they started to hold out, and all this crazy stuff with the running back position. So I don't know. I feel like they will do something, but I'm not necessarily sure it's going to be just, 12 o'clock hits and all of a sudden, boom, the Ravens signed Derrick Henry. Might take a little time, but also it's going to take a little time, Jake, is essentially beginning to rebuild this offensive line. Both John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta talked about it. And DeCosta said this year there's probably going to be some change on the offensive line. Remains to be seen what that looks like. Said it's a deep draft class. John Harbaugh also talked about the offensive line and said, look, you went in the trenches first and admitted they've got some questions on the offensive line. Tyler Linderbaum is your all-pro center. He is a sure thing. You can pencil him in there. But then you have 4 really big question marks. Both your guards are free agents who started for you last year, and John Simpson and Kevin Zeitler. Both Ronnie Stanley and Morgan Moses couldn't get through the full season without having a rotation, which I don't believe can win you a Super Bowl. I think you have to have guys on the field, just figuring out, this guy's on the field for 100% of the snaps, and that's how you do it. Stanley obviously suffered from the knee injuries this year and was not as effective as usual. Morgan Moses is also getting up there in age. So how would you kind of rebuild this offensive line, and how many starters outside of Linderbaum do you expect back next year?
I would try to sign a starting guard. You don't have a starting guard under contract right now, or anyone with starting experience at the very least. Maybe one of these guys will prove me wrong, but I would sign one of those guys. It sounds like they're ready to move on from Zeitler. He's getting a little bit older. I maybe would have tried to keep him around, but I don't know. He had a number. He was contractually disgruntled even going into the last year. So, I think that's over. I think Simpson they'll probably move on from, but guys are going to be available. You just had Laken Tomlinson come available. He's a sturdy kind of guy that maybe you could plug in there. I don't know like how he would fit scheme wise, but I would definitely try to sign a starting guard. Then I would let one of these young guys, whether it's a Voorhees or a Ben Cleveland, finally slot in there and, make good on its potential. You've got Patrick McCary as kind of that dependable swing tackle. You've got Falele still in the mix there as a developmental piece. I don't know if he's going to be much more than a rotational guy at this point in his career. So I would sign a starting guard. I would try to draft a tackle within the first 2 days. And then I would kind of just let the chips fall where they may, because you're invested a lot in Stanley still. You're still kind of deep in him money-wise. And then obviously Morgan Moses, you mentioned that he's getting a little bit older, but you're just going to try to have to make it work with him. And, if you got a slot McCary in there, I think he's shown up and shown out whenever he's called upon. So I'm fine with that. Let's get that starting guard in there. Let one of these young guys prove themselves and then try to draft that tackle that can replace Moses and then maybe even eventually Stanley. I don't know what's going to happen with him because, the timing sucks and all that. It's not his fault, but that injury that he suffered in 2020, he's just never come all the way back from it. So it's time to start thinking for the future, but also get yourself that starting option on the interior too to supplement Linderbaum.
Yeah, I think that the fact that both Harbaugh and DeCosta said something about it is pretty telling about they understand what's coming for them on the offensive line in terms of needing to retool and rebuild that group. Now, I do think that you have options in how you can do that, but to me, it's not just going to be a one-year process either, where you're not going to take the Chiefs approach from a couple of years ago after they lost that Super Bowl and literally replace every single guy on your offensive line. They had 5 new starters the next season. I don't think it's going to go that way. But over the next 2 to 3 years, I think outside of Linderbaum, we'll see probably 3 or 4 new starters, probably 4, everybody but Linderbaum on that offensive line. So a lot of insight from both John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta from the Combine. Jake, I appreciate your time hopping on with me. Thanks so much for joining me and chopping it up and blaming me for the Dalvin Cook signing. I think that's the biggest thing I took away from this. Tell people where they can find you and what you're working on here as we get further and further into the offseason.
Yeah, anytime, my friend. It's always good to hop on here and give you some grief, and big fan of what you got going on here as always. So appreciate the time. And if you guys want to check me out, you can find me Exit 52 Podcast on YouTube. That's where we post the Exit 52 Podcast, as well as the Jumbo Set, which is our Ravens vertical with me and Spencer. You can find us on social media at Exit 52 Podcast across the board, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff. Orioles season ramping up. If you're a big fan, we're going to have plenty of content going. as that approaches. And we're very excited. So yeah, appreciate you having me on. And yeah, let's do it again soon.
Yeah, for sure. Big time in the city of Baltimore. It's a sports city. I always say it, Jake. And I think the Baltimore Birds, they're coming. And I think it's going to be an exciting year for the Orioles. But obviously, we're still going to be talking Ravens here on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have for you here today on the show. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, follow along in audio form and video form as well. Stay tuned. We got a lot coming here. I'll see you back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.